In the mid-17th century, the personal physicians of European kings did something that would shock any modern diner. They took venomous, writhing vipers, chopped off their heads, skinned them, and boiled their flesh into a dark, sticky medicine. This compound, known as Theriac, was the most expensive and sought-after prescription in the Western world, swallowed by monarchs like Louis XIV to survive poisoning and plague. Yet, at that very same moment in history, if a commoner in London attempted to cook and eat that exact same snake for dinner, they could be accused of witchcraft, spiritual corruption, or demonic worship. For centuries, Europe maintained this bizarre, contradictory relationship with the serpent, treating it as a sacred, life-saving drug in the apothecary, but an object of absolute moral terror on the dining table. Meanwhile, thousands of miles to the east, in the Pearl River Delta of China, the snake was neither a demon nor a dark medical secret. It was a celebrated winter delicacy, simmered in clay pots with chrysanthemum petals and lemon leaves to warm the bones and balance the spirit. This stark division raises a profound question. Why did one of the world's most widespread creatures become a symbol of culinary refinement in one great civilization, while remaining an absolute taboo and a source of terror on the tables of another? We assume our food choices are driven by simple taste or survival, but the boundary of what we consider food is drawn by invisible forces. The myths we believe, the landscapes we farm, and the ancient fears we carry in our souls. To understand how the snake was crowned in the East, we must look at the Pearl River Delta. In southern China, consuming snake meat is not a modern fad, nor a desperate food of last resort. It is an ancient tradition with a documented history spanning over 2 millennia. The Shanhai Jing, or the Classic of Mountains and Seas, a mythical and geographical text dating back to the pre-Qin period, recorded that the inhabitants of what is now Guangdong province routinely harvested and consumed snakes. For these early communities, the snake was a natural part of the local ecology. The subtropical climate of southern China was humid, lush, and teeming with reptilian life. As human populations grew and intensive agriculture took root, the relationship between humans and snakes became even more intimate. The dominant agricultural practice in southern China was wet rice cultivation. A rice paddy is essentially a man-made wetland, a complex ecosystem that requires standing water for months at a time. These flooded fields became magnets for frogs, fish, insects, and rodents. Naturally, they also attracted the predators that fed on them. Snakes. For a Chinese farmer working barefoot in the mud, snakes were a constant presence. Rather than viewing them purely as pests, farmers saw them as a double benefit. First, they controlled the rodent population that threatened the rice crops. Second, they represented a free, abundant source of high-quality protein. Catching a snake in the paddy fields required skill, but it cost nothing. Over centuries, what began as a practical supplement for rural farmers evolved into a sophisticated culinary art. By the late 19th century, a wealthy scholar named Jiang Kongyin elevated this rustic ingredient to high society. He created Taishi snake soup, a legendary dish combining the meat of 5 different snake species with shredded chicken, abalone, mushrooms, and medicinal herbs. The dish became a symbol of status, luxury, and culinary mastery, cementing the snake's place in Chinese gastronomy. Now consider the contrast with Europe. Throughout its history, the European continent has suffered devastating famines. During the Great Famine of 1315, crop failures plunged northern Europe into starvation. Contemporary chronicles record desperate citizens eating dogs, cats, rats, and even grass to survive. Centuries later, during the Siege of Paris in 1870, the city's inhabitants consumed the animals in the local zoo, followed by domestic pets and sewer rats. Yet, even in these dark periods of extreme deprivation, snake meat never entered the European culinary repertoire. Once the crisis passed, Europeans returned to their traditional foods, leaving wild reptiles completely off the menu. Why did Europe reject this source of protein even when facing starvation? The answer lies first in the realm of the spirit. In Western civilization, the aversion to the snake is not a simple matter of taste. It is a deep-seated cultural taboo, rooted in the foundation of its dominant religion. In the book of Genesis, the serpent is introduced not just as an animal, but as the ultimate catalyst for human suffering. It is the serpent that speaks to Eve, tempting her to disobey God and eat the forbidden fruit. As punishment, the creature is cursed above all livestock and wild beasts, condemned to crawl on its belly and eat dust. For nearly 2,000 years, Christian Europe viewed the snake through this biblical lens. The snake was the physical manifestation of Satan, a symbol of deceit, temptation, and original sin. To touch a snake was to touch evil. In medieval folklore, snakes were associated with witchcraft, pagan rituals, and dark magic. The idea of killing a snake, cooking it, and consuming its flesh was not just unappetizing. It was a form of spiritual pollution. You could not separate the meat from the myth. Eating the serpent meant consuming the very symbol of the devil. While Western culture locked the snake in a spiritual cage of sin, Chinese culture embraced a very different mythology. In Chinese creation myths, snakes are associated with divinity and the origins of humanity. The primordial creators of the world, Nuwa and Fuxi, are traditionally depicted as sibling deities with human upper bodies and the lower bodies of dragons or snakes, their tails intimately intertwined. The snake was not seen as a tempter that cast humanity out of paradise, but as a symbol of creation, fertility, and wisdom. Furthermore, the snake is one of the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac, representing mystery, intelligence, and elegance. Because the Chinese spiritual landscape did not associate the snake with moral evil or original sin, there was no religious barrier to bringing the animal into the kitchen. This cultural divide was reinforced by a stark difference in geography and agricultural evolution. Europe's temperate and cold climates are fundamentally unsuitable for reptiles, which rely on external heat sources to regulate their body temperature. The European continent has a relatively low diversity of reptilian species. There are only about 30 to 40 snake species native to Europe, and the vast majority of them are small, slow-growing, and offer very little physical yield. The common European adder, one of the most widespread species, rarely grows longer than 60 centimeters. To hunt these small, elusive creatures in the wild was energetically inefficient. A hunter would expend more energy searching for and capturing a small snake than they would receive from eating it. Instead of hunting wild reptiles, Europe developed a highly successful agricultural system based on pastoralism. The vast rain-fed grasslands of northern and western Europe were ideal for grazing large domesticated herbivores, cattle, sheep, and pigs. These animals provided Europeans with a massive, reliable, and highly concentrated source of protein, fat, dairy, and leather. In a society where beef, pork, and mutton were readily available, there was no economic or practical incentive to exploit wild reptiles. The European diet became centered on domestic mammals and birds, and the wild snake was ignored. In southern China, the economic equation was different. The warm, wet climate supported large snake species, including pythons and cobras, which offered a substantial amount of meat. Furthermore, wet rice agriculture is one of the most labor-intensive farming methods in human history. It yields a massive amount of calories per acre, but it requires enormous human labor and provides relatively little pasture land for large livestock. In this system, cows were highly valuable draft animals used for plowing, not for slaughter. Therefore, the Chinese diet relied heavily on pigs, poultry, and whatever wild protein could be harvested from the surrounding environment. In this context, the snake was a valuable, high-yield resource that could not be wasted. This practical necessity was elevated by a sophisticated philosophy of health. Traditional Chinese medicine is built on the concept of maintaining harmony within the body by balancing opposing forces, yin and yang, hot and cold. Southern China's climate is characterized by intense heat and high humidity, conditions believed to introduce dampness and wind into the human body, leading to ailments like arthritis, joint pain, and fatigue. Within the framework of Chinese dietetics, snake meat is classified as a food with strong warming properties and the specific ability to dispel wind and activate circulation. Eating snake soup in the winter was not seen as a culinary eccentricity. It was a medical intervention, a way to restore balance and protect the body from the environment. Europe also had a traditional system of medicine known as the humoral theory, established by Hippocrates and Galen. This system balanced 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. However, European medicine did not develop a corresponding tradition of integrating wild reptiles into daily meals to maintain health. Under the humoral system, reptiles were generally classified as cold and dry, qualities associated with melancholy and poison, Rather than balancing the body, eating them was thought to disrupt the humors, reinforcing the culinary avoidance. Yet, this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. We assume that Europeans, bound by religion and geography, never consumed the snake. But for nearly 2,000 years, the wealthiest and most powerful people in Europe did consume snake meat. They did not eat it from a soup bowl, but from an apothecary jar. In the 1st century SCN, Andromachus, the personal physician to the Roman Emperor Nero, was tasked with creating a universal antidote to protect the emperor from assassination by poison. He took an existing recipe called Mithridatium and modified it, adding a revolutionary ingredient, the dried and roasted flesh of the venomous viper. This compound became known as Theriac, or Venice treacle. The logic behind adding viper flesh was rooted in the ancient belief that venomous animals carried the antidote to their own poison within their bodies. By consuming the flesh of the viper, the user would acquire immunity to all toxins. For the next 1800 years, Theriac was the most famous and expensive medicine in Europe. It was prescribed not just for poisoning, but as a cure for the plague, smallpox, and general decay. The production of Theriac was highly regulated. In cities like Venice and Montpellier, the compound was mixed publicly by licensed apothecaries in front of magistrates and medical faculty to prevent counterfeiting. Thousands of vipers were harvested across Europe, their heads cut off, their bodies skinned, and their flesh boiled with dill and salt to be incorporated into the dark, sticky paste. Monarchs like Elizabeth I of England and Louis XIV of France took doses of Theriac regularly. It was not until 1745, when the French physician Robert James and the French Academy of Medicine published studies debunking the efficacy of the compound, that Theriac began to disappear from European pharmacies. This historical detail reveals a fascinating paradox. Europeans did not avoid the snake because they believed it was completely useless. They avoided it because they classified it strictly as a medicine, a toxic cure for extreme emergencies, rather than food. To eat a snake for pleasure was unthinkable. To eat it as a drug was a privilege of the elite. Ultimately, the divergence between the Cantonese dining table and the European apothecary jar reveals a fundamental truth about human culture. The boundary between the edible and the inedible is not a biological fact, but a cultural construction. The Chinese saw the snake as a natural extension of their wet rice landscape, a source of energy, and a tool for bodily harmony. The Europeans saw the snake as a spiritual threat, a symbol of the fall, and a dangerous creature whose only redeeming value was as a desperate shield against poison. The next time we look at the culinary choices of another culture with confusion or judgment, we must remember that our own plates are shaped by the same invisible forces. What we choose to eat is a reflection of our history, our environment, and the stories we have agreed to believe. The boundary of the edible is not written in our biology, it is written in our soul.